Day 1. Taking responsibility for your life. Where real change begins. Many people spend years searching for the breakthrough that will finally transform their lives. They look for the perfect opportunity, the right connection, the ideal moment, or the secret strategy that will suddenly make everything easier. Yet despite their efforts, they often find themselves returning to the same frustrations, facing the same challenges, and wondering why meaningful progress seems so difficult to achieve. What many eventually discover is that lasting change rarely begins with a new opportunity. More often, it begins with a new perspective. Before your circumstances change, your thinking must change. Before your results improve, your approach must improve. And before you can create a different future, you must first accept ownership of the direction your life is taking today. This is where our journey begins. Taking responsibility for your life is one of the most empowering decisions you will ever make. Unfortunately, it is also one of the most misunderstood concepts in personal development. Many people hear the word responsibility and immediately think of blame, guilt, or criticism. They assume that taking responsibility means condemning themselves for past mistakes or accepting fault for every difficulty they have experienced. That is not the case. Taking responsibility is not about blaming yourself for everything that has happened in your life. It is about recognizing that, regardless of what has happened in the past, you have the ability to influence what happens next. Life is not always fair. Some people begin with advantages that others never receive. Some face challenges that seem impossible to understand unless you have lived through them yourself. There are circumstances we do not choose, setbacks we do not deserve, and obstacles that appear without warning. Acknowledging this reality is important. However, there is a significant difference between recognizing that life can be difficult and believing that your future is entirely determined by those difficulties. The moment you convince yourself that your circumstances control your destiny, you surrender the very power that could help you change them. The choice we face every day, whether we realize it or not, each of us faces a choice every day. We can focus our energy on everything that is outside our control, or we can focus on the things we have the ability to influence. The first option often feels easier because it allows us to explain why progress is difficult. We can point to external factors, unfortunate events, difficult people, or unfair situations, and conclude that success simply wasn't available to us. The second option requires more courage because it forces us to look inward. It asks us to examine our decisions, our habits, our mindset, and our responses to life's challenges. While we cannot control every outcome, we can always control how we respond. That response has far more influence over our future than most people realize. Consider two individuals who experience the same setback. Perhaps they lose a job, fail a business venture, or miss an important opportunity. One person sees the event as proof that they are incapable of succeeding and allows disappointment to define their future decisions. The other views the setback as a lesson, adapts their approach, and continues moving forward. The circumstances were identical. The outcome was not. The difference was found in the way each person chose to interpret the experience. The stories that shape our lives. One of the reasons responsibility can feel uncomfortable is that it often requires us to challenge the stories we have been telling ourselves for years. Every person carries a collection of beliefs about who they are and what they are capable of achieving. Some of these beliefs serve us well, while others quietly limit our potential. You may have heard yourself say things like, "I'm not naturally confident. I've never been good with money. I always struggle to stay disciplined. People like me don't achieve extraordinary success. These statements can become so familiar that they feel like undeniable truths, yet in most cases, they are simply conclusions drawn from past experiences. The problem is that when we repeatedly tell ourselves the same story, we begin to act in ways that reinforce it. The belief influences our decisions, our expectations, and our willingness to take action. Over time, the story becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Responsibility begins when we stop treating these stories as permanent facts and start examining them more carefully. Are they truly accurate? Or have they simply become comfortable explanations for where we are today? The answers to these questions can be life-changing. Shifting your focus. One of the most practical ways to develop a greater sense of responsibility is to focus your attention on what you can control rather than what you cannot. This may sound simple, but it is a habit that requires conscious effort. Most people spend a surprising amount of energy worrying about things they have little influence over. They worry about other people's opinions, past mistakes, unexpected events, economic conditions, or circumstances that may never change. The problem is that worry rarely creates progress. Action does. When you shift your attention toward what you can influence, even small actions begin to generate momentum. You stop waiting for ideal conditions and start working with the resources available to you today. That momentum creates confidence, and confidence creates further action. This is how positive change begins to compound over time. A different conversation with yourself. As you move through the next 30 days, I invite you to pay close attention to the conversations you have with yourself. When something goes wrong, notice your first reaction. Do you immediately search for someone or something to blame? Or do you ask yourself what can be learned from the situation? When progress feels slow, do you conclude that your goals are unrealistic? Or do you look for adjustments that could improve your results? The questions we ask ourselves often determine the direction of our lives. People who consistently grow tend to ask empowering questions. They focus on solutions rather than excuses. They search for lessons rather than reasons to quit. They remain curious even when circumstances are challenging. Most importantly, they understand that responsibility is not a burden. It is a source of freedom. Because once you accept responsibility for your future, you no longer need to wait for someone else to change your life. You can begin changing it yourself. Reflection questions. 1. In which areas of your life do you feel most in control, and why? 2. Where do you find yourself blaming circumstances more than taking ownership? 3. What story about yourself have you accepted without questioning? 4. How might your life change if you focused more on what you can influence and less on what you cannot? Daily action step. Take 15 minutes today to write about one area of your life where you would like to see improvement. Describe the situation honestly, then make 2 lists. In the first list, write down everything that is outside your control. In the second list, write down every action you could take, no matter how small, to improve the situation. Commit to taking one action from the second list before the day ends. Success affirmation. I take ownership of my choices, my actions, and my future. I focus my energy on what I can control and trust my ability to create positive change.